is Big Ideas, Birkbeck's free public lecture series where academics bring their research out to local communities around London, sharing the exciting and innovative work that happens at Birkbeck and opening up the world of research and university. The series is organised by Birkbeck's Access and Engagement team, who support underrepresented groups of people to apply and succeed here at Birkbeck, University of London. This podcast will introduce you to the upcoming talks in the Big Ideas series. Our researchers will give you a preview of what's in store and hopefully entice you along to the event. If you like what you hear today and want to come along, you can find the details in the web link in the description of the podcast. We'd love to see you there. Today we are joined by Leila Sellers. They're a PhD candidate funded by the Wellcome Trust and researcher here at Birkbeck. They will be introducing us to their research ahead of their Big Ideas talk in Camden in February, celebrating LGBTQ History Month. The talk is titled Trans Identities, Experiences and Everyday Lives from 1966 to 2004. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, it's lovely to be here.
We're really looking forward to your talk, which is actually going to be in celebration of LGBTQ History Month.
Yeah, no, that feels it's really nice that it's got that context. Yeah.
Absolutely. So if I might just dive in and ask you, what is your research? Would you like to give me an overview of what it's about?
Sure, yeah, so broadly my research is on trans history, and so I'm looking between the years 1966 and 2004. And I'm looking at trans history through a case study of a trans organisation called the Beaumont Society. So this is a self-help group that still exists today. It started in 1966, which is why I'm starting there. And what I'm really interested in is focusing on the lives and experience of the members. And the Beaumont Society gives me a really good way of doing that because it kind of lets me kind of trace the way trans people's lives and experiences have changed over time through the organisation, which also has changed a lot. So it's kind of a nice, kind of neat way of kind of looking at trans history.
Can I ask what inspired you? Where did this start? What brought you to this research?
So there were a few things. So I knew I wanted to do a PhD, but I knew I wanted it to feel kind of currently relevant. I think there's sometimes a thing where you can end up doing a PhD, which you're really interested in, but doesn't feel like it has a lot of wider significance. And I felt like it needed to really speak to now. And so I was talking to various people, and we were talking about gender, and a lecturer of mine just said, gender, that's the story. That's where everything is now. The way we think about gender, the way people have thought about gender in the past, that the changes, that's the most significant thing. So that was in my head. And then I was working at the Wellcome Library, which is just around the corner. And a friend of mine who was an archivist, so she works in the library and kind of helps look after all the collections, so people might make deposits of kind of their sort of things that they want saved, essentially. And so she came kind of trundling up with a trolley and was like, "You want to look at this?" and someone had anonymously donated an archive, and so it was their personal collection of the Beaumont Society magazine. So that's one of the main things I look at, and also their own letters and photographs. And so it was just a kind of an amazing thing. So in history, one of the things you're always trying to do I'm always trying to do is kind of find out about people's lives. So you're like, and it's quite hard to do that sometimes because so often people who are hidden or marginalised, their lives don't get recorded in the way that so they're not writing diaries which get published, or they're not writing newspaper articles. And often, and particularly in the case of my organisation, people are keeping that part of their life secret from even people that they knew. So actually, suddenly I had this kind of window into history, and I just found it completely fascinating. And so so I kind of went away and thought about it and kind of wrote it up into a PhD proposal, and that's where I started.
Like you said, it's a really interesting time to be studying gender. There's a lot of discussion happening. There's a lot of debate happening. How do you kind of marry the research that you're doing, which is very historic, with the kind of very current discussions that are happening right now and about moving forward?
So I think one of the things that's happened with the way that trans people are talked about currently is that it's other people talking about other people's lives. Mm-hmm. And it often feels a bit like trans people have just appeared, you know, this huge eruption in society, this kind of obsession in the media, and then you feel like that means that there isn't a kind of understanding of that sort of the history of where, you know, where these people in society have come from, what the people that came before them went through. So I think there's a kind of general lack of understanding, and there's a lack of kind of nuance, I think. So when we talk about trans people, or even when we talk about any kind of aspect of someone's identity, it tends to mean that you see them as that one thing. So you see someone as like, that person is transgender, or that person is a mother, or whatever it is. And so you tend to, I think there is a tendency to kind of ignore all the other things about them that make that person up. So one of the really key things I'm trying to do in my work is look at all the aspects of that person's life and the way they intersect. So one of the kind of key things that I do in my research is interviews. So I go and talk to people. And that's really nice because you get a sense of who they are, go into their homes, have a proper chat. So you see them not just as a trans person, but as a fully formed, all these different aspects of their life: work, family, age, geographic location, and how that impacts on their experiences. And so I think in that way you just get, it's so much richer. So you get so much more of an understanding of how, you know, there isn't just one trans identity in the way there isn't just one any identity. But I think that it's been a really nice aspect of my research, is really kind of exploring that and really getting the sense of how diverse and how rich a history trans people in the UK have had.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. In that, how long have you been conducting this research for? When did this start?
So I started last September, so September 2020. Hang on, yeah, September 2021.
Okay.
But I think, yeah, time is very elastic. And yeah, so I started then. So I'm about a year and a half in, and I've got about a year and a half to go.
I see.
Yeah.
So what has evolved? What has surprised you? Did you learn anything along the way that has really kind of redirected your thinking or your understanding?
So I think what's been really, really interesting is, because I'm doing these oral history interviews, so I'm going out and talking to people, so I can ask them directly about things that I'm kind of having a bit of a problem with. So things like language, which is so crucial. So the way that trans people think about themselves, the way they've thought about themselves in the past, the way that we label people. We label people all the time in all different ways, and I think that within trans communities, it can be very interesting because we tend to think this very inclusive term, trans. And actually, when you talk to people, some people really like that. And they say, yeah, no, definitely, that's who I am. And other people say, hang on, no, my identity is lost in that because it's too broad. I want you to think about me with a very specific label. And so because I can say to people, what do you think about the trans identity? And then they can answer, and then and it really informs my work. So I don't have to think theoretically about language and I'm going to use this, and it's because I've thought about this theory and I've read this thing. I can say I'm using it because I spoke to people and this is what they said to me. This is the word they want me to use. So I think that feels very reflective and very responsive. And I think all the way through my research, what I'm trying to do is centre the people who I'm talking to, their story. And then it's lovely because there isn't a kind of is that what they want me to think? I'm like, no, definitely, because I've asked them, I've had that conversation. And I think the other thing that's really interesting is, again, because I can talk to people, so I've got archive sources that I mentioned before, so the Beaumont Society magazine, and I can read that, and that tells me a lot about the organisation itself. It also tells me a lot about people at the time who wrote into the magazine and contributed articles. So I've got that kind of first-person accounts from the time, but I can kind of use that and kind of cross-reference again with my interviews and say to them, what did you think about this happened in 1981? And they can say, I don't remember that, that's rubbish, or like, oh, that's the society saying this, but actually what was happening was this, and they said this, and and so you've got this kind of dialogue between people. So again, I feel like I'm kind of listening in on this conversation that's happening, and people can, and I think, again, going back to what I was saying before about this idea that lots of different people have lots of different feelings, and this kind of very rich, very diverse story. Again, it kind of feeds into that because it's not just one story; it's lots and lots of different people's stories, and I can kind of look at all of those different people saying all these different things and say and kind of hopefully capture all those different aspects of the kind of wider history.
My next question was going to be about why you feel this research is important, especially in the context of LGBTQ+ History Month, but I feel like we've kind of touched on that.
Yeah.
This conversation around trans identities isn't always rich. But do you have anything to add?
I think we have to some extent covered it. I think yeah, the sort of the most interesting thing for me is this feeling of placing a very marginalised group at the centre, and because I focus so much on the way people thought and felt, it does feel like we're kind of changing a bit of the narrative around it. So a lot of the kind of research that's been done in the past, they've used kind of, which there has been some research, but it has tended to focus on kind of external outside bodies talking about a trans group. So you get doctor's notes or police reports, so someone getting arrested for going out dressed as a woman, for example. And so you get that side of the story, and you can kind of infer to some extent and think about what that person felt. But what I can do is ask people and say, what was it like going out in 1982? How did that feel? Did you get arrested? What was that like? And so I think that feeling of it being about the individual story and those personal accounts, it feels, I hope, is what it's doing, is giving the people I speak to a bit of a space where in the past I don't think they've had that. I think it's felt quite objective. Yeah.
What would you like audience members who come to the talk in Camden to take away from this session?
I think what I'd like them to get a sense of, one is like hearing about these really interesting people and learning a bit more about trans history and the stuff we've spoken about. But on a kind of like wider level, I think I'd really like them to get a sense of sort of history as storytelling. So I think what's really nice about this, again, is like I've got all these different people, and actually in the talk I can show you photos and what's been lovely for me is actually going and meeting people and talking to them and having that and feeling like it really brings the stories to life. And also I feel like the other side of it is I really want to kind of demystify history and academic research, and kind of actually what the most important skills I have are that I'd quite like talking to people, and I can do that. So it's not this kind of really intellectual academic. There's some part of that which obviously is helpful, but actually the best interviews I have are when I can just have a conversation and people relax into it. And so I think I hope that people get a sense of that it's not this big kind of exclusive club. It's actually something that if you have an interest and you can kind of pursue it and you're interested in it, you can kind of bring other skills from other parts of your life into that. And I definitely, for me, when I talk to people, they always say, they come out of it and they don't say, oh, you know so much about this. They say, oh, you're really easy to talk to. I really enjoyed that. So yeah, hopefully that's what they'll get as well.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Really looking forward to the talk at the end of the month in Camden. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. Brilliant. Thanks.